All right, so we're going to start the second part of Module 2, which is talking about absolute value equations. So there's a couple of things that I want to clarify real quick about absolute value equations. Remember from the last unit, you had things that said like x plus y squared, and then we said that x was negative, x might equal negative 15, and y was 3, or 2, I'm sorry, 2. Let's make it 2. So then you put in the numbers, and so you would have said the absolute value of negative 15 plus 2 squared. And so we did this, and that was 4. So this would be negative 15 plus 4, which was negative 11. And because it's in the absolute value, which is the distance of 0, this became 11. So we know that there are two answers. When you think about a number line, and I say the absolute value of some number is 15. Well, that has two options. So on a number line, it's the distance from 0. So both positive 15 and negative 15 have the absolute value of 15 because it's the distance from 0. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to find out what number will make this have the absolute value of 10. Okay? It's got to be equal on both sides. Now, the other thing that I want to make very clear here is that while it acts like parentheses here, it's not the same. And what I mean by that, when we get to questions where there's a number out here, you can't distribute into here. Okay, that's one of the misconceptions that we have there, because we're saying the distance from 0. So you don't want to distribute in there. Okay, we want to move that first. All right, so what we're saying here is something has the absolute value of 10. So that's one possibility. 2n equals 10. However, in here can also be negative 10. So we set up a second equation. Because we have two possibilities, we need two equations. Okay? There's only going to be one or two exceptions to that rule, and I'm going to talk about it. So this will be 2n equals negative 10. And then once I set up my two equations, I can solve. All right, so then n equals 5 here, and then n equals negative 5 on this equation. So my answer, and we usually use brackets or something like that, it's not a point. We're just saying that our answer is 5 and negative 5. And I'm horrible at making that right one. Okay, so the key here, and these are the two rules that are really important as you're working through this, is the first thing you want to do is isolate the absolute value. Then set up two equations if you need to. And I'm going to talk about the two times that you don't need, or the two exceptions right now. Then set up two equations. And then 3 will be to solve. So this is the notes, kind of how to go through this. So what I mean by isolate the absolute value is notice how on these questions there's nothing out here multiplied or added. It's just what's in the absolute value. So this is isolated. So once it's isolated, I'm going to ask myself, because I told you there would be times that we don't set up two equations. So let's think about this. Is there a number that if I plug it in here and it becomes, let's say it's negative 4. Well, let's do it this way. What plus 7 would be negative 5? We say, well, Ms. Rose, that's negative 2. All right. So negative 2 plus 7 is 5. What is the absolute value of 5? Positive 5, not negative 5. We say, well, then, Ms. Rose, it must be negative 12. If I put 2 here, negative 2 plus 7, that gets me 5. And then the absolute value of that is not negative 5, so that won't work. So, well, I think it's negative 12. Okay, so let's try this. So negative 12 plus 7 is negative 5. What is the absolute value of negative 5? Absolute value of negative 5 is positive 5. That won't work. So what this tells me is there's not a number that I can put in here that will make this negative. It won't happen. So this answer is no solution. So if you have isolated that variable, you can't make that decision until you've isolated the variable. So if you've isolated the variable and this is still negative, then it's no solution. So same thing here. Is this variable isolated? Yes. Will it ever be negative? No. And what I mean by that, again, is if I watch 6 times 5 is 30. I hope we agree there. The absolute value of 30 is not negative 30, so that won't work. Okay, 6 times negative 5 is negative 30. Well, the absolute value of that will not be negative 30. It will be positive 30. So if you have isolated this, and this is still negative, then the answer is no solution. Okay? All right. If there is a solution, if the answer is yes, then I set up my two equations. So like this one. This is isolated. This is positive. I'm good to go. So n over 9 equals 4, and n over 9 equals negative 4. Once I set up my two equations, I just solve them like I did in the last module. So 9 times 4 is 36, so n will equal 36, and 9 times negative 4 is negative 36. Now, I have this question. Ms. Rose, will it always be the same number, just plus and minus? No, and we're going to talk about that next, okay? So if we look down here on number 5 on your absolute value notes, it says isolate the absolute value. We got it right there. I'm trying to remind you. So I can't make any of these decisions about whether I need two equations or not unless I isolate the variable, or the absolute value. So here's my absolute value. So to isolate it, I need to move the 4, so minus 4. So x minus 6 equals 5 minus 4 is 1. Now, this is isolated. Is this negative? Nope. So I can set up two equations. So x minus 6 equals 1, and x minus 6 equals negative 1. So then from here, I add 6 to both sides, and x equals 7. Here, I add 6 to both sides, and x equals 5. So my two answers here are 7 and 5. Now, again, to go back to that question, is it always going to be the same number, plus and minus? You can see right here that that is not the case, okay? All right, here, this is my absolute value. What do I need to do to isolate it? Well, this is saying this times this, so the opposite is division. So it goes back to our solving equations. If you need extra help on solving equations, let me know and I can schedule that here. Okay, so 54 divided by 9 is 6. Negative 9 is 6. See, this one looked like it was going to be negative, but when you divide by negative, it makes it a positive. So we're actually good to go ahead and set up our two equations. And this, again, is finding the two answers that could possibly work in here. So then minus 7, so n equals negative 1, minus 7, n equals negative 13. Now, I've said over and over and over again that with equations, you shouldn't ever, ever, ever turn in 1 and not know that you're right. Because watch, what is 7 minus 6? 1. The absolute value of 1 plus 4 is 5. That one works. Look at 5. 5 minus 6 is negative 1. The absolute value of that is 1 plus 4 equals 5. I'm 100% sure that I'm right. Okay? And then I showed you the other day how you could check your answer on your calculator. I can type in, if you're not sure, afraid you'll make a mistake, math, and then over to the math button here, and then over to NUM, get your absolute value. So I'm going to say x, which I think is 7, always put it parentheses, minus 6, get out of the absolute value, plus 4. Bam, it's 5. Math, absolute value, over to NUM, absolute value. I'm going to put in the second answer, I think it is, 5 minus 6, get out of that, plus 4, and it's 5 too. So I know that 7 and 5 are my answers, okay? Now, on this one, if I want to check, I just got to hit the 9 first. So 9, then math, then absolute value, and then I put in my answer. N is negative 1. Always use parentheses when you're putting a number in for a variable. Plus 7, get out of that, and that was it. What does it say? 54, something. Negative 9. I was saying, wait a minute, I did something wrong. Negative 9, math, over to NUM. See, even I can make a mistake. Parentheses, negative 1 plus 7, negative 54. There we go. I'm going to try it again with negative 13. So negative 9, math, over to NUM. And look how fast it is once you get the hang of using your calculator. And so I make sure that I get negative 54, and I do. I know that I have the right answer. Okay? All right, so going on to these ones. Again, I'm going to, see, I can't make the decision about this negative because this is not isolated. So to isolate this, remember it's minus 3, so we will say plus 3. And so k over 6 will equal 1. Is this Isolated, yes. Is this negative? No. So I could say k over 6 equals negative 1. And then I cross multiply. So k equals 6 and k equals negative 6. Okay, so my answers are 6 and negative 6. Again, I'm awful at making that other parentheses. All right, this needs to be isolated. I'm going to add 8. Now, one of the misconceptions is this is not being multiplied by this. Because of the plus sign, this is the minus 8, so we have to add 8 over here. And so the absolute value of 2 plus x equals 3. Is this isolated? Is this positive? Yes and yes. So my two equations, 2 plus x equals 3. 2 plus x equals negative 3. And then I say minus 2. And so x equals 3 minus 2 is 1. Minus 2 again. And x equals negative 5. Okay? So then my answers are 1 and negative 5. These are two different answers, not a point. Okay, this is not a point, so it's two different answers. So then we get a little more difficult right in here. Again, to isolate this, if you think about the equation 5x plus 7 equals negative 13, the first thing that you would do is minus 7. It's going to be the first thing I do here too, minus 7. And so negative 5, negative 4n equals negative 20. Now, over here, once I did that, I would divide by 5. It's the same thing right here. So negative 5, negative 5. So negative 4n equals, that would be a positive 4. So this is isolated. This is positive. So there's one equation. And then here is two equations. And so divided by negative 4. And so n equals negative 1. Divided by negative 4. And n equals positive 1. So my answer is negative 1 and 1. Okay. Over here, same thing, minus 2, minus 2. Negative 2 is v plus 10 equals 2. Then I'm going to divide by negative 2. So v plus 10 equals negative 1. Oh. So now let's see what happens. This is isolated. This is negative. This will never be negative. So this one is no solution. I can stop right there. Okay. Let's try the next one. Number 11. Plus 8 or plus 7. Plus 7. I don't know why I'm trying to write 8. Okay. So that's 4 times r over 6 equals negative 1 plus 7 is 6. Yeah, it is. Okay, this is going to be ugly. But anyway, divide by 4. So then this is going to be r over 6 equals 6 over 4. Well, this is a proportion. So r times 4 is 4r equals 36. Cross multiply. We cross multiply proportions. Divide by 4. And so r is going to equal 9. I got to do the same thing. And I got to do r over 6 equals negative 6 over 4. So this is going to be 4r equals negative 36. And then divide by 4. So then I had somebody in class the other day say, well, Miss Rose, is that always going to happen when you multiply and divide? Yes. The 9 and negative 9 will happen then. But if you've got something added or subtracted to it, that won't happen. And I won't say always, because you got more math to learn. But for right now, it's a good hint. Okay. So minus 2, and negative x minus 1 equals 5. Okay. So far so good. Now, this is isolated, this is negative, or positive. I got to set up my two equations. A lot of negatives in this equation. All right, so then I'm going to add 1. So negative x equals 6. Now, this is understood to be a negative 1. So I have to divide by negative 1, and x will equal negative 6. Plus 1, plus 1. Negative x equals negative 4. Divide by negative 1, and x equals 4. And I know I'm solving these really quick, but we've already had a test on this, on the solving equations part. So I'm hoping that we kind of know that part from there. If not, like I said, come see me and we can work on just solving equations. All right, then last but not least are these last two. So plus 1, so negative 8, 9 plus 2x. You say, well, Miss Rose, all them negatives, this has got to be a no solution. Well, let's see. So here we are when we put that together. Divide by negative 8. Oh, nope, that's going to be a positive. So 9 plus 2x equals 5. And right here, a word of advice is I have a lot of people that will do what I just did, and they won't make the absolute value bigger. And so they think that that's a 19 when they go back to read their handwriting. So just be careful of that. So this is positive. So I've got my next equation to be negative there. So minus 9, and then we have 2x equals negative 4 divided by 2, and x equals negative 2, minus 9, 2x equals negative 14, divided by 2, and x equals negative 7. So my two answers, run out of space there, they are negative 2 and negative 7. Okay, last one, plus 5. So 3 absolute value 7n minus 5 equals negative 68. Yeah, 78, sorry. 78, okay. And then divide that by 3. And so 7n minus 5 equals 2, negative 2, and 6, negative 26. Uh-oh. Positive, negative, no solution. Now, I talked about there would be one more situation. I want to talk about that. And that is if you get the absolute value of something, let's say you had this equals 0. Well, because 0 is neither positive nor negative, we won't get two answers. You're saying how far is this number from 0? And so when you can't make this negative. So then you just solve it and get the one answer. Okay. All right. I hope that answers your questions about absolute value. We're going to keep building on this.